What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 207 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot. This is a two-issue miniseries from Dark Horse Comics in the mid-90s, written by Frank Miller with art by Jeff Darrow. And if you will recall, that is the very same creative team that brought us Hardboiled that I talked about yesterday. And if I had to pick two comic books that were 100% polar opposites from each other, could not have anything in common at all, I would choose Hardboiled and Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot. And it's especially interesting since it's the same creative team that brought us both of these stories. Hardboiled is a high-octane, action-packed story with lots of car chases and explosions, lots of sex, drugs, and violence. It is very much something that you would want to keep out of reach of children. It's a rated R comic if I ever saw one, while Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot doesn't really have any of that stuff. It is inspired by Godzilla movies and Ultraman and Astro Boy. Lots of Japanese science fiction and superhero entertainment went into the genesis of this story. This is, I guess you could say, a Western manga. That is a phrase that Grant Morrison came up with several years ago, and I think that that kind of thing applies to this story. This is very much a child-friendly story, but it's not a stupid story. It's not dumbed down. I hate it when people suggest dumbing down something for younger audiences, because children and younger audiences are a lot smarter than we as adults give them credit for. And they can read something and they can tell if it's really dumb or if it's intelligent, but it's still something that they can enjoy. And I do think that this is something that your child who's just wanting to get into comics can enjoy, but it's also something that adults can enjoy as well. I'm 27 years old, and I read this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed Hardboiled also, and it's a very different kind of fun than I'm having with this story than I was having with Hardboiled. I'm not really sure which one I like better. It's kind of like saying, which do you like better, a hard-boiled egg or a scrambled egg? Well, they're both eggs, and they're both very good, but they have their pros and cons, and, you know, one tastes different than the other, but they're both very good. So it's really hard to compare these two because they are so very different from each other. If you are my age or a little bit younger, you might actually remember that there was a cartoon series that was based on this comic book in the late 90s. I want to say it was on the Disney Channel, and I didn't watch much of that cartoon. That was right around the time period where I was no longer watching American cartoons for a brief period of my life, and I was more getting into anime. I was watching first Pokemon and Digimon, and then later on I was watching Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, so I wasn't watching as much American animation, which is ironic because this comic book is very much influenced by a lot of anime, and then it became an American cartoon. So that's interesting. I don't know how involved with the cartoon Frank Miller or Jeff Darrow were. I can't imagine that either of them were very highly involved other than just signing off on it existing. But I seem to recall that in the cartoon, Big Guy, who is obviously the big guy, that he was a human being inside a large mecha suit. And that is not how it is in this comic. Or if it is, it doesn't show the human being. At one point, slight spoiler here, at one point Big Guy actually has to cut off his arm during this big fight with this giant protozoic dinosaur creature, and it doesn't show a human arm inside the robot arm that he has cut off. So unless he's just inside the armor and we can't actually see the human being inside, it would seem that that is at least one thing that the cartoon series did a little bit different from the comic book. But since I would say very few people are actually aware that this is a comic book, I would say if anyone is aware of this series, they are aware of it as a cartoon series. I would say it's okay for the cartoon to have deviated from the source material like that. But this is something kind of similar to Monkey Man and O'Brien, where, as near as I can tell, this was intended to be just a limited series, but it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. And I can tell you, after reading a few different books over the last few weeks that end on a huge cliffhanger, nothing is more frustrating than reading a story with a cliffhanger that is never resolved. Now, this is not nearly as bad as Monkey Man and O'Brien or Danger Unlimited. It gives us just a slight sequel hook, but it's not like the monster at the end is saying, "I will get revenge on you, Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot." It's nothing quite like that. It's just hinting at the possibility of new Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot stories, which we never actually got. I don't know if that's because Jeff Darrow and Frank Miller just weren't interested in doing more stories, or if they were interested but the audiences weren't interested. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think very many people are familiar with this story. Most people people, even today, when you talk about Frank Miller, they're going to talk about his Batman work, his Daredevil work, even some of his other indie work like Sin City or 300. They're not going to talk about Hardboiled or Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, which is a shame because, like I said, I think this is a very fine comic book for people of all ages, and I really enjoyed it, and I do wish that we had more Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot stories to talk about and to read. So those are my loose thoughts on this comic book. I hope that you guys liked this review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with another video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.